Up Close is presented by Tennova Healthcare, with 6 hospitals and more than 1,000 dedicated physicians. For more information, tennova.com.
Coming up next on Up Close, the journey from glass to art. An in-depth interview with artist Richard Jolley as he prepares to unveil what he calls a project of a lifetime. Thanks for joining us for Up Close. I'm Stephanie Aldrich. Glass artist Richard Jolley was raised in Tennessee, and his sculpted works of art have been showcased around the world. But it is here in his home state where he is unveiling a first-of-its-kind installation at the Knoxville Museum of Art. It's a project that pushes the limits of size and space, and the eyes of the art world are taking notice of this permanent exhibit. I had the chance to see him at work inside his West Knoxville studio, turning the elements of heat and glass into sculpture. Jolley talks to us about the art, science, and soul behind some of his pieces. Well, Richard, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Oh, well, thank you for coming out.
Sure. I wanted to start out by talking a little bit, you know, when so many of us just think about glass, just generally, and making glass, we think of kind of the functional glasses, bowls, those kind of things that, you know, maybe also have a purpose in the home to use somehow. Why did you gravitate, though, towards the art side of things versus how it's been done so much by some of those famous companies?
Well, I think there's a long tradition of the decorative arts. I was introduced to glass going to college in the art department. And at that time period, there was a tremendous amount of non-traditional materials for making sculpture, whether it be plastic, ceramics, glass, other materials. I mean, we think of traditions, someone like Jackson Pollock, who was using industrial paints in the 50s, you know, which was considered radical, now is just accepted as commonplace. And so I think all artists try to find a material that they feel that they can bring a fresh voice to.
I wanted to read this quote, and you had told me this was from a few years ago, but I thought that it was just really spoke well. It seems as though you wake from a dream one day to realize that you've been involved in a journey with a material and process for over half your life, and still there is so much more to discover, uncover, and be covered up by. One of the joys I have with this expressive material, glass, is that you are making something from nothing. You've never gotten tired of it. Why do you think that is?
You know, I think the quote I always like to use is a Walker Percy quote is, forgetting is a way of remembering. And I think a lot of it is, how do you bring a freshness? How do you bring this naivete or sort of that original interest and joy into what you're doing? And I think it's so easy to get bogged down as we become much more knowledgeable about whatever we do to be impacted by that, where, oh, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that. And instead, by trying to be a little bit more naive, you're able to keep a freshness and continue to move towards something that is actually more interesting than our everyday life, which, as I say, most artists are masters of the mundane. It's just that you chose the mundane things that you enjoy doing.
You mentioned earlier, just, you know, you feel like it is a very difficult material to work with. There is that challenge there. And creating something that looks so natural, like, you know, leaves, birds, branches, out of something just kind of so hard and pliable for a while, but then there's the heat and all those challenges too. How do you get those, I guess, just that feeling of softness in nature out of such a hard material?
When you talk about this, I like to reference writers, where you write, you edit, you hone. I think like anything else, I've always been interested in the articulation of the material. Early on, I thought a lot about trying to have my work look fluid, look effortless. And I think that's something that's sort of carried through the years as far as disguising the complexity of technique. Because for myself, if you look at art and you just go, oh, that's extremely complex, then that essence of humanism has not come out. Therefore, you possibly were not successful in articulating what you were interested in articulating.
You've gravitated to the human form, too. Tell me more about that.
Well, I think to start with, Well, there are several things. One is I found it extremely challenging. Two, if you look at on a classical sense, the most prominent artistic movement in the state of Tennessee were the agrarians or the fugitives, literary group out of Nashville and Swanee that discussed sort of the human condition in the transition from the early South or agricultural South to the industrial South. Therefore, they were talking about the human condition, and then reacting against Oak Ridge and the abstract, deciding to go figurative. So I think it's sort of aligning with sort of the artistic movements in the state that had a precedence.
There's the obvious art and beauty in your pieces and the colors, and you know, even when I was just here a minute ago, I'm like, wow, that's the most beautiful blue. And I said, did you create that blue? And you're like, yeah. And I'm like, wow, that's just great. How'd you do that? And it's like what you said, when you have been doing it so long, it just becomes second nature. You can almost, I don't take that process for granted, right? How do you not take that process for granted and keep it fresh for yourself?
Well, I think with anything else, if you talk about coloration of glass, if you look at it like baking or recipes, you know, you have a certain amount of recipes for a certain amount of colors, and you try to, I think some of my work recently has become more monochromatic and more formalized, and then other things are very polychromatic. But I think a lot of it's just sort of that interest in trying to develop something or learn something additional. So when we were working on the museum project, it was going to start out being a black and white piece predominantly. And then as I got to the sky component, I realized that I needed to introduce color. So with that, for the universe section, we melted a half a dozen new colors that we normally don't do.
There is so much science involved to this art as well. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? Because that's not the part that most people get to see or really appreciate, because we just don't always know.
Well, I think a lot of you always try to take for granted. You know, I'm mixing and melting my own glass, my own colors, so to oversimplify, it's most glasses are 2/3 sand and 1/3 fluxes and stabilizers. I have built specialized chambers for melting glass. It starts out in, my sand is in a granular format, very much like you would confuse it with baking flour if you saw it on a counter. But anyway, most soda lime based glasses melt approximately 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. So you fuse your glass from a granular state to a glassy state, and then you hold your holding temperature for working your glass is approximately 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And then during the general gesturing process of making, it fluctuates in between the 2,000 degrees and a little bit lower as far as stiffening. If you talk about a lot of my work as being additive technique, as a general principle, you keep your core cooler and you make your applications in a hotter surface, and then you're able to gesture them. Once the piece is completed, then it goes through an annealing cycle, which is a cooling cycle. It equalizes your internal and external stresses of your glass. If you talk about something like Riddell stemware, it's probably annealed within 3 to 6 hours. If you talk about something like the Mount Palomar telescope, it was annealed for 2 years. The first one cracked, and so the next one they annealed longer. So there's a lot of difficulty. I mean, really, glass should be made in stemware, things like that. It's very simplistic. Most of the things that I do have thick, thin, so there's a lot of odd stress, so you have to compensate for that with longer annealing cycles and various, develop various tooling styles for working on them.
It sounds to me like you're as much of a scientist as you are an artist.
I prefer to think of myself as an artist first, to try to keep the poetry first, and then the other is just the necessity to be able to achieve the other.
Let's talk more about the Knoxville Museum of Art project. This is a huge undertaking, to say the least. Just speaking about the scale of this alone, what does this mean to you and your career when we're just talking about just even the size of this project?
Well, I'm really on the exhale part. I've just completed the installation, except for a little bit of the lighting, which a firm is doing, and I'll just basically visually tweak it with them. So in one way, I'm on the exhale part of it instead of the start of it. But I know when I was a young artist trying to read biographies and autobiographies, I read this biography on Noguchi, and it talked about it taking 5 years to complete a sculpture garden in Detroit, and I just thought at that point in my life in the 20s that was just crazy, and of course now I'm that crazy. But with that said, it was very challenging. One is that I knew I needed to, from the scale that my work was currently, to be able to read out properly in this space, that I needed to be able to figure out how to achieve that. So the first year we worked on trying to figure out how to achieve these large figurative objects out of steel and glass. And so really some work that I had started in 2000 with acrylic drawings or paintings became a core for these larger glass figures, which the largest one is approximately 3,600 pounds.
That is huge. Tell me some more of the proportions we're dealing with, because this is going to fill a large space. And I think the other thing too, this is going to be permanent. This is staying.
As I jokingly say, I know what it takes to put it in. If somebody wants to take it out, it'll be just as hard. But anyway, the Knoxville Museum of Art is an Edward Larrabee Barnes building, so it's a fabulous minimalist structure for showing art. There's a great hall, which is approximately 105 feet in length, 22 feet tall, and it's not a rectilinear, it's actually a rhombus, so it's about 36 by 44. But with that said, one of the things in trying to fill the space is I did not want to impede on the floor usage. So everything was suspended on the wall or from the ceiling. So originally, in thinking about things, I decided on using sort of a post and beam process for the support of the weight. So one of the first things I did was try to make a small maquette on the direction that I thought I would go with these steel and cast glass pieces to be able to talk to a structural engineer immediately. And the interesting thing is I figured that in 4 running feet, we probably would hit about a ton, which ended up being fairly correct in the accuracy of once we completed our sculpture. It's called the Psyche of Life within the Power of Dreams and the Wonder of Infinity. But to oversimplify it, the life cycle, there are 6 earth elements and 2 sky elements. Actually, there are 3 sky elements, but since 2 are the same, I lumped them together. But so there's primordial, emergence, flight, so that's youth. There's desire, tree of life, contemplation, that's adulthood, and then a metaphysical part of sky for transformation, hopefully, and then a universe part of sky, which hopefully reflects the wonder of the universe.
When you're commissioned to fill a space this large that's going to be permanent, and you have a wealth of ideas, but that's also a certain amount of pressure to, oh gosh, what do I want to say?
This is a truly unique commission because I did not have to compete for it. I did not have to submit drawings for it. The patrons said, we are giving you a carte blanche. We just want to be satisfied with it when it's completed. And so with that, on one level, there's more pressure because there's a tremendous issue of trust involved. And I think anyone at my age takes that extremely seriously. But with that said, going back to talking about early Southern literature, everyone starts out talking about a sense of place. So I knew eventually that I would start with a sense of place. So primordial is a modified context of poplar trees, if you wish. And then I knew I wanted to have the figure involved, so I started with a male and female figure, and that became emergence. And then at that point I realized that I was going to develop into a life cycle. The flight was designed the way it was. One of the difficulties of the Knoxville Museum, other than a fabulous building, but there is a mezzanine entrance and stairwell which bisects the wall or in half. So in talking about a narrative, it's sort of like creating a great stutter. You know, so one is you have to figure out how to get from one side to the other and then tie them together. And originally I was probably just going to hang some random objects on some of the columns on the other side, and yet I realized that I needed something more encompassing, and that's more or less the development of Sky.
We were talking a lot about just the trust that exists there, the way you see it with having this project at KMA, and it must have really just meant so much to you as an artist for them to say, do what you want.
Oh, it is. I mean, it's a great it's an opportunity of a lifetime, you know, to be very simplistic about it. You know, it's very few artists have the opportunity to have a patronage that would be so supportive of myself as an artist and of their community.
Your vision for this piece, actually it started out as some drawings. Is it a very different creative approach for you as an artist when you're commissioned with a piece like this than when you're just sitting down to create anything else, really? I mean, certainly just the scale itself required a different approach, but is it just a totally different mindset when you're commissioned to do something this specific, this big?
Well, you know, I think the scale is, you know, it is something that you really have to wrap your head around as far as how am I going to achieve this image. As far as, I think also once you get to my age, you have a tremendous confidence in yourself about how you can figure out things. I think most artists are extremely good at problem solving and visualization. So I think those are things that you just accentuate those traits that you know you have, and then just figure out how to do it. And it does take, you know, quite a bit of dedicated concentration or full absorption.
How tight was some of the space with getting some of the pieces in and just maneuvering, fitting things into the building?
Well, basically the piece ended up being about 7.5 to 8 tons worth of work, a combination of steel and glass. Some of the small components fit in very easily. The larger components we craned over the south garden wall. We had to pop a window and doors out to put them in. So the one flaw of most museums is that they do not have large entrances and egresses.
And so some of these were a pretty tight fit in the end, were they not?
A number of the pieces were within an inch of the ceiling as we went through the installation process. So it's, you know, very careful installation.
As an artist, as someone who had spent so many years planning this, making it happen, just the material you're working with in and of itself being breakable, you had to have been a little bit nervous with cranes and these kind of things moving your work around.
The duality about glass is that, as well as being extremely fragile, it's extremely strong and durable in some formats. And so the large figures are extremely strong and durable, relatively speaking, as far as the handling. I was much more worried about the marring of the patination on the steel part of these 5 large figures than I was the actual breakage of the glass. And as I jokingly say, I was the only one that broke glass during the installation, so that was good.
Is that right?
Yes.
Oh, what'd you break?
Oh, I broke a few doves and a few branches and a few of the orbs in the universe section of Sky, but relatively speaking, for that amount of glass, only, you know, half a dozen things.
What does it mean to you to have this opportunity of a lifetime, as you said, here in your home state?
You know, with anything, I think you have to go outside to be appreciated, and then once that occurs, then you actually are very humbled by the fact that people in your community can appreciate what you do. The story I like to tell about that is that no one to start with liked the Eiffel Tower, and now it's the icon, you know, to oversimplify, 100 years later, now it's, you know, the icon that everyone wants to go as a tourist to in Paris. So, I mean, I think there are always these things that come about that are timely, and I do appreciate that I had the opportunity.
Is this your legacy here?
Well, let's hope I have a few good years left.
Well, that's what I'm kind of getting at. I mean, you're young still, and you get to still put this big collection of your work together and have a hand in doing it. It's not you know, all these years later where people are bringing your collections of work and putting it together for you, you're getting to design it, you're getting to have control creatively over it. What does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, I think everyone talks about the American dream. I think as an artist, it's completely different. It's not necessarily the building of a business, the selling of a business, those sort of things. I think it has to do with having artistic and creative freedom. The opportunity to do this project leads right into that. So on one level, I feel extremely lucky.
You have to be humble still, right?
Yes.
Because what somebody likes today, they might not like tomorrow, right?
I don't think that's an issue of humbleness. I think it's just a sense of, do you have something else to say? You know, because if I felt like this project was all I had to say, you know, I would probably not be having this interview and just have hung it up already.
But this project will have worldwide attention from the artist world, will it not? I mean, this is a big deal.
Well, it's, you know, quote, the largest figurative glass and steel installation in a permanent situation inside a museum in the world. But I think with that said, there's a lot of great art out there.
What does Richard Jolley do next after this?
I don't know. Right after we finished, we went on vacation. But, you know, I think with everything right now, I'm going through a, you know, recentering process as far as trying to figure out what I want to do. I'm working on some small projects. I'm starting to pick up some objects that I had not finished 5 years ago, and so hopefully by the time we complete those, we'll move on to something else, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity to do some additional ambitious projects that will open up in the future.
And you've had some nice surprises along the way too. I mean, when you were starting out, you probably couldn't have imagined that you would have been designing martini glasses or things like that. You've had some interesting opportunities with ads and ad campaigns, correct?
I was involved in one of the absolute statehood campaigns that was for Absolute Tennessee, so I happened to be the artist for the state. They did an artist from each 50 states. So I did 3 bottles that had sort of blue line drawings, which I was doing at the time, that were on a sculpted bottle. And then with the Bombay Sapphire, I designed a specific martini glass for them.
You don't ever know what might be commercially successful, one piece versus another. Have you ever had any surprises along those lines of, oh really, that one? Or anything like that?
Well, the quote I like to use with that, there's a gentleman who's deceased, Christopher Wilmarth. He said, when the magic's gone, there's just merchandise. And so I think for a real artist, you try to have that magic, and if that's infused into your work, then hopefully you figure out the rest.
Does it feel like work for you still today? Is it ever a grind, or is there still that Richard Jolley world that you just find it relaxing and you'd like nothing more than to just go, be alone, do your work?
As a young person, you think, you know, there's such purity in being an artist. As you get older, you realize there are so many gray areas, but I still truly enjoy making things, making objects, being an artist, and so far so good.
Has it ever been hard for you to straddle that line of wanting to be an artist, to be well known enough commercially to be able to sustain yourself, and then that desire that you know, maybe somewhat stereotypical of an artist who just wants to kind of do their own thing and not really necessarily be in the public eye, but just have their work be in the public eye?
You know, I think there are probably truisms with certain statements like that. For myself, I've never tried to think of it in that format.
How do you think of it?
I don't.
You just know what needs to be done, right?
I think one of the things I learned early on is that you can be efficient without a detriment to aesthetic development. That's something that's not really taught in academia. But I think if you are going to survive as an artist, I think most artists that you see that are at the top of their game, they're not quite the flighty space cadets that everybody likes to view as Van Gogh and chemical imbalances. So, you know, I think it's all the above, and I think there's not really, you know, a simple answer. Each individual person sort of has a pinch of this and a pinch of that. You know, I've had a lot of accolades. I've, you know, done things that I feel very pleased about and that sort of thing. But I think as an artist, you look to the future. You appreciate where you are, but you always look to the future. And so I personally feel that one thing does not make you. I think it's a number of things, and it's very accumulative. So I think you also, if you're too starstruck with yourself, you won't go back to work.
Glass artist Richard Jolley, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can check out Jolley's one-of-a-kind exhibit at the Knoxville Museum of Art. Meantime, Jolley will continue making new pieces in his West Knoxville studio, the place where he's been creating his works since 1975. Thank you so much for joining us for Up Close. I'm Stephanie Aldrich.
Up Close is presented by Tennova Health, with 6 hospitals and more than 1,000 dedicated physicians. For more information, tennova.com.